I'm coming. Ah, hello. Come in. I am Yesteris, keeper of the sacred library. You must be here about the tiny bookcase. Then follow me. I've sent 2 adventurers out to find stories. So join me here by my crystal ball, and let us see where they are now.
And it turned out that they were twins.
Oh, it's time again.
What's that?
Hello? Another pub, is it?
Yeah, it's the Slag and Dragon.
Lovely gin selection.
And you are?
Oh, I'm Ian Howard. I do a one-man jazz session here at the pub each week, every Wednesday.
That's fine. Boys, you know what I want.
Absolutely. Nico, you're up. This week is Secret Files.
Okay, let's do this! Toffee Adam leant back gently against the enormous mound of beanbags, each of them still perfectly plump. No sign of the great internal divide that often overtakes the beanbags of our world. For you see, this world is not ours. This world is a wondrous place, where the BL trees hang right with crisp and fresh sandwiches all year long. The great bubbling whiskey river is rich and sweet, and never leaves even the inkling of an ache in your head. And the booming industries of sitting around, chin-wagging and jacking off are paying such a high living wage that it's almost embarrassing that everything is free. This is Dongley Dang, the happiest place you can imagine. Reclining in the beanbag mound, Adam lolled sideways to face Sprinkle Dave, his bestest buddy. Dave was a good way into his daily shift of napping. He'd recently been promoted and was now running his own department, which consisted entirely of himself. He'd signed off his own pay rise immediately, which the others in the company had applauded. That was some forward thinking right there. A little drizzle of green spittle was oozing from the corner of Dave's mouth, streaking across his rosy red cheek like a shooting star. Adam rolled onto his back and stared at the sky. A few wisps of candy floss trailed lazily overhead. A squat slider beetle crawled up onto his belly. It had clearly smelled his hunger and come to be eaten. Its soft beef patty and cheese carried delicately on its French fry legs. As second nature, he picked it up and bit it in half. It let out a satisfied sigh of relief, so delighted to be eaten. Adam did not reciprocate the gesture. He was becoming what his society called disenchanted. It didn't happen often, and was normally quickly forgotten about. But lately Adam had started to wonder if there was less to life. He hefted the remaining half of the slider into Sprinkle Dave's open mouth, where it landed with a satisfying plop. Dave woke up with a start, and began chewing. "Well, gee, thanks for sharing that with me, buddy," he said as he worked away at the tasty treat. He looked Adam over. He was normally a super cool cat, but right now he was looking like a real sourpuss. "What's the matter, bud? You look like you got a bad case of the gloomers." Adam repressed a sigh. "Yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like maybe everything is kind of far out wackadoodle. Like, what's even wrong with maybe being even like..." He paused. This was a risky statement. "Sad." Sprinkle Dave smiled, which he always did, and fixed his friend with a warm look. Maybe you need a visit from the blowjob fairy." That was always a surefire way to cheer people up. The fairy industries were booming, as most industries in this land were. The tooth fairy, willing to trade cash for dead bits of you, had initially ruled the roost, but in recent years the blowjob fairy had built an empire, where old Toothy would take what was in your mouth, Blowy would take what was yours in her mouth. At the end of the day, it was a rich oral-based trade, and although it was hard to know what the fairies were getting out of it, they seemed perfectly thrilled to do their work, so everyone was, as always, delighted by the arrangement. Conversely, the blowjob fairy was publicly distanced from her main competitor, the cunnilingus gremlin, who, due to the ancient right of being exactly what you eat, was a complete twat. Adam shook his head, appalling Dave. No, bud. I want to go to Room 1A. Dave shuddered. Room 1A was different. In a world where everything was whatever you wanted it to be, who was to begrudge the Gumdrop King his one private room? The door was behind a curtain in the palace, in a gap between the Scoffatorium, where an endless delicious buffet was yours to demolish, and the Shagatorium, where creatures of all shapes and sizes fulfilled each other sexually, and the safe word was an unbreakable law. The king didn't have many rules. He actually only had the one rule. You do not speak of, think about, and definitely don't go anywhere near Room 1A. Heck, Dave and Glitterball Sally had double-teamed Queen Gumdrop on the king's birthday, and he'd gleefully cheered them on. He danced in the flames when some cheeky youngsters had launched fireworks in the palace. He was a seriously chill guy. Why would Adam break his one rule? Maybe he was low on sugar or beer or one of the other essential food groups. Before he could even formulate the question, a slow process as questioning things was not in a dongly-danglian's nature, Toffee Adam had taken to his feet and begun storming towards the Gumdrop Palace, a glint long since seen in the eyes of his kind, terrifying the passing flutterbys. Adam slipped between the pillars of the palace, Dave trailing loosely behind him. In terms of group distribution of attempted stealth, it was definitely around 50% and swinging quite hard towards one particular party member. Dave shifted nervously and scratched his arse. A nearby guard gave him an encouraging nod and a thumbs up that seemed to say, I hope you satisfy that itch, buddy. Dave waved back at the guard and took a satisfying sniff of his recently used fingers, with nary a hint of shame. When he looked back to his companion, he saw that the curtain for 1A was shifting back into place, and Adam was nowhere to be seen. Sprinkle Dave did not know how to panic, so he didn't. Absent-mindedly, he wandered into either the Stuffatorium or Shagatorium. In that moment, he truly didn't mind which. Toffee Adam found himself in a small, square room, where everything was a colour he'd never actually seen in person before, but he had heard stories. Grey. In the middle of the room was a large cuboid structure, a row of handles decorating the side facing the entrance. Tentatively, Adam stepped forward and tugged at one. It came with his hand, dragging some kind of large tray out of the device. It was filled with strange, folded yellow things. On one not too far into the selection were the words Adam, Toffee. With a shaking hand, he reached for the file and drew it out, allowing it to fall open in his hands. He was met with reams of information. What he liked to eat, how he had his steak cooked, how many hours of sleep he preferred, a few odd notes about sneaking a finger in signed off by the blowjob fairy, one here about his obsession with gummy worms. He dropped the folder to one side and pulled out another, then another. They were all full of notes on the people he knew, how to keep them compliant. And then, where the disenchanted went. Adam read with grim horror the terrifying details of what happened to their minds, their souls, and he was suddenly snapped from his reverie by a voice. You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? The unmistakable royal cadence of the Gumdrop King, accompanied by a strange click-clicking sound that Adam didn't recognize. You had to come a-snooping, didn't you? Bliss wasn't enough, huh? Adam whirled to face the king. Every glistening, sugary inch of him was curled around a large metal tube. His finger seemed to be tucked around some kind of switch underneath it. What is all this? Paradise, Adam. You think it all comes for free? The food, the money, the blowjobs. That cabinet contains every piece of data I have compiled to keep this kingdom under my control.
to make my subjects fat and compliant. Hell, every now and then one of you sneaks in here, can't resist that one rule, and I have to do a little cleaning up. But no matter, you can be our next tribute, and my kingdom will remain untouched for another decade.
Adam thought back to the disenchanted who had vanished before. 10 years seemed about right. It was spot on, in fact. The king was trading lives for peace, with who only knows what. Adam had to flee, scream, shout, but with a whiz and a bang, something discharged from the king's tube, and Adam fell into a crumpled heap, his colourful world disappearing into blackness. The gumdrop king stepped over his fallen subject and began putting away the secret files, before swiftly drawing a pentacle around the fallen form.
Here you go, my liege. Toffee for you. Nice and fresh.
He felt the flames at his back as he left, a smile on his face. Another decade of peace. That would do nicely.
Wow. Fuck, man. That was some crazy shit. Oh, I loved it.
Yeah, it's very much getting like X-rated Adventure Time vibes from it.
So that the whole concept started just as that thing of like Secret Files is a strange prompt because there are obvious ways to go. The whole spy thing jumps to mind immediately, and I just wanted to subvert it as hard as possible. And I ended up at this magical gumdrop kingdom where instead of it being like we would walk into a room and it was fantastical, imagine if they walked into a room and all that was in there was a bloody filing cabinet. Just to me, that was absolutely... I was like, oh, that's it. That's the one. I've got to write it.
It's a really interesting examination of the prompt, definitely. And, yeah, laugh out loud funny, and, yeah, it just flows really nicely.
So was the implication was when someone goes in to try and find out what was in the room, they get turned into the delights that everyone enjoy to keep them supple.
I think that's a read. I think it did end up being that. So the idea in my head was that like around about 10 years the magic starts wearing off, and the most strong-willed will be drawn towards that cabinet. And I think he gave them to Satan. Possibly.
I was getting a definite Satan vibe off that, like that, and also like a bit of horror at the end that he couldn't even look at whatever it was that he was delivering the guy to, the guy's soul or whatever.
Yeah. What looking in the folder, like now thinking about it, it's got kind of a Pickman's painting vibe.
Mm.
But yeah, it was absolutely great fun to write that one. Really enjoyed it.
Oh, crikey. Well, mine's going to be a departure in tone, I think. But
should we aggressively switch the tone and have you go now?
I think we might have to.
Okay, let's have a story.
Secret Files. The black sedan hissed over the rain-slick motorway. Within the warm confines, Diego Silman worked his shoulder blades into the comfortable leather of his seat. It hadn't been a long drive, but Diego was happy in the knowledge that life was good. In another time, in another place, he could be out in that rain, soaked to the bone and wondering how long it would take him to feel warm again. But right now, the heated leather was soaking the workout ache from his muscles. Behind the wheel in front of him, the driver was competently navigating the M25's traffic at a pleasantly high speed. Diego thought the man's name might be Stephen. Stephen was wearing a well-tailored suit that seemed cut to allow him to move freely. Diego knew that Stephen was likely armed. All of the police assigned to ministers seemed to be. There was suddenly a huge harumphing sneeze, and Diego looked to his left at the Prime Minister. The man had not bothered to cover his nose, and instead blasted mucus over the back of Stephen's headrest. The bodyguard didn't miss a beat as he changed lanes. "Bless you." Diego tried hard to suppress the revulsion he felt. Yes. How do you feel, Diego?" Diego was taken aback. He'd been attempting to hide his nervousness. "Very well indeed, Prime Minister. In a word, excited. Excited to be starting a new chapter of my life and helping you to usher in a new era of prosperity." Jesus fuck, Diego. Not in the car. Save it for the hoi polloi. It's perfectly natural to feel nervous. Becoming a member of my personal staff is a significant step up for you. Young lad from Edmonton done good, eh? I appreciate the opportunity, Prime Minister. Would it be possible for me to read the briefing before the meeting? Of course, Diego. With that, the Prime Minister reached down to the footwell and drew up his ministerial red box. He popped the briefcase open with a practiced touch, and Diego could see the box was rammed with sheafs of files. Many of them had spilled their contents inside, and Diego felt his own precise nature being assaulted by the disorganization. How could he ever find anything in there? Around here somewhere, the Prime Minister muttered as he pushed his pudgy white hands into the tangle of papers. As he rooted around in the box, some loose pages fell out across the seat between them, and down into Diego's own footwell. He scrabbled to gather them all up, and as he did so, he caught some key phrases from the documents. Vital pandemic information necessarily suppressed. Nuclear response. Trade talks damaged. Living conditions and liability. Emissions report dire. Diego realised his mouth was hanging open and quickly shut it as the Prime Minister continued to snuffle like a prize-winning hog that had scented truffles. Here we are. The Prime Minister threw a thin red file onto the seat between them and then looked at what Diego had in his hands. Yes, just throw them back in there. Diego obliged, trying to straighten the papers as he did so. The Prime Minister's hands moved quickly to shut the lid. It snapped closed, barely giving Diego enough time to get his fingers clear of the heavy leather-bound box. Quickly! The chuckle the man gave scraped uncomfortably against Diego's senses, whose heart was beating rapidly after the near miss. Diego reached down to the red file and then suddenly felt the man's soft hand gripping his wrist. That's top secret nosh you're about to dig into there. Very hush-hush. The entirety of our plan for the country. Indeed, the only plan to save this country. As he spoke, Diego looked up into the slightly doughy face of the Prime Minister and saw, in those pale cow eyes, a strange intensity he had not noticed before. A focused gaze that made Diego feel like he was hanging from a hook in an abattoir. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the look was replaced by the usual foolish good humour that was recognisably the Prime Minister's countenance. Diego opened the file as Stephen adroitly guided the car off the motorway and plunged it onto the smaller roads that led into London. The file was thin and contained only 2 pages. Both were held in place by a small elasticated diagonal strip. As Diego freed them and began to read, the sedan threaded down under overpasses, which periodically cut off the light in abrupt slashes. The first page had the usual information regarding the secretive nature of the document. It was boilerplate, but Diego had usually seen it atop fat stacks of papers awaiting review. He turned the page and looked at the plan. Blank. It was a blank page. He turned it over, expecting there to be neat typing on the back. Nothing. Diego's brow creased involuntarily, and he felt the car slow as they were once again hidden from the sun by a bridge. Stephen, I think here will do. The man's voice seemed far away. Prime Minister, there seems to be a problem with this file. Diego looked up at the soft face. It was set in a lopsided slant that might charitably be called a cheeky smile. Like a waxwork model that had been left in the sun, the smile slipped further and further until rows of crooked white teeth could be seen. The moment the sedan stopped, Diego saw Stephen get out of the car with alarming speed. In a moment, the large bodyguard had thrown open Diego's door and was reaching for him. Instinctively, Diego pulled away and grabbed the headrest in front of him as Stephen began pulling him bodily from the car. Diego's fingers dug into the soft leather. He felt some of his nails bending off their respective digits as Stephen yanked on his legs. Help! Diego yelped at the Prime Minister. The man simply leaned forwards and peeled Diego's fingers from the headrest. Diego flopped out of the car and onto the tarmac outside. He felt the hard surface grate his palms and was immediately filthy from the rain-wet ground. Diego was too confused and scared to think about his clothes as he was dragged up to his knees by the open car door. Strong fingers pried his mouth open and forced it onto the metal runnerboard. He could taste the road splashes from their journey along the M25 and tried to scream. It was muffled when he felt Stephen's boot against the back of his head, pressing him into the metal. With terrified eyes, he looked up to where the Prime Minister was shuffling his weight across the seats towards him. The man leaned down slightly so that Diego could see those abattoir eyes again. I require your full attention. Power does not need a plan or a direction. It demands only intent and the drive to seize it. We live our lives by this principle. Blink if you understand this. Diego blinked. You are a commoner with a bad accent and irredeemably poor taste. The people like to see you at my side. You will smile at me and issue statements for me, with certitude that my actions are the best thing for the country. Blink if you understand this. Diego blinked. You are mine. Blink. Diego blinked. I think that will do, Stephen. Diego felt the pressure release, and he pulled away from the runner board, feeling the grit in his mouth. Come along now, back in the car, there's a good chap. The Prime Minister's camera-ready manner had returned. Diego clambered back into his seat. He felt dazed. As he sat down, his legs began to shake. The rest of the journey seemed over in a twitch of a moment. Soon enough, they were passing through the large gates, and Stephen once more got out of the car, this time to open the Prime Minister's door with respectful grace. Diego stared at the Prime Minister's back as he shuffled in an ungainly manner out of the car to wave at the wall of reporters who assailed him with their flashes and microphones. Diego felt as if he could only vaguely make out the language they were using. To him, it all just sounded like the bleating of sheep.
I gotta say, man, your characterization of the Prime Minister in that was fucking brilliant. Absolutely, like seriously, so spot on. Completely sold the story, like elevated it to a level. Like I'm not saying it was a bad story.
I get it.
But like I was so sucked in, listening to this guy. I was like, oh no! I just like full on, just the simple act of giving him real depth of character. It turned him into this heavy Palpatine, and just made me like terrified of him. Just really, really sold it.
Oh, nice. Glad to hear it.
The description of abattoir eyes really struck a chord, and similarly, like I felt myself go, oh, like very similar reaction.
He's he wasn't actually supposed to be as Palpatine as I made him. I think I was sort of channeling that a little bit as I was speaking. Maybe it's the return to bringing Star Wars up every week, Nick. I don't know.
Well, that's three for three. That's I mean, the main thing really there is, I think, the voice. When like giving gravitas, you tend to end up with a Palpatine thing going on. And like you never got to the do it level, but because there was like a little bit of croakiness, and it's there because it's sinister. Palpatine talks like that for a reason. It's because it's sinister, and it did really work for the character. And I think it helps with the trope. As soon as they were like moving under underpasses, I was like, they're about to turn left into a bad neighborhood, and this guy's getting shot in the head. I know this story. Terrifying.
Yes, it was a bit of an odd one. I actually felt, especially as I was reading it, there was like an over reliance on people's first names, and it's always interesting when you're reading a story out and performing it, what's sort of sticking with you and what isn't sticking with you. But I quite liked that everyone had a name apart from the Prime Minister.
Yes, I do like that.
And also just on the voice, I was initially going to obviously do a Bojo, but I decided against it for obvious reasons.
Obvious reasons?
I just just thought maybe episode 3 wasn't the time to completely attack our current government.
State your allegiance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was fun to write. It's not usually a writing in the real world isn't something that I normally do.
Yeah.
And it felt very odd to have signifiers in there, like, name checking the M25, for example.
Yeah.
It really put it in a place and time for me, which.
See, I found that last time as well. Like talking about Tinder. All of a sudden, this is very much our universe. Obviously, I rebelled against that this time, but.
Indeed, but I'm actually really excited to hear our guest story. Ian, have you got one for us?
Yes, I do.
Let's have it.
The sun began peeking over the horizon. The morning dew condensed on his bedroom window as the light permeated the edge of his drawn curtains. Simon was still blissfully asleep in his bed, nested within layers of cheap duvet before his mobile phone struck 5:30. The mobile's default alarm played, but it was the way it vibrated on the frigid wooden floor that woke Simon up. He did his best not to leave the perfectly achieved temperature under the duvet as he swiped at the irritating rattle. He eventually convinced himself to brave the icebox atmosphere, for if he was late for work, he'd never be able to afford this lap of luxury. His flatmates were already out working even stranger hours, convenient for almost naked Simon as he staggered into the bathroom. He braced himself on the sink and looked into the gaunt 30-something man appearing in the medicine cabinet mirror. Simon ran his hands across his coarse stubble. After a shave and shower, he was dressed and ready to leave. His pocket-laden janitor overalls handily held all his security keycards, but he was rummaging around for a cereal bar. He had just enough time at the bus stop to chomp through it. The number 57 bus arrived and Simon stepped on. Taking a window seat, he lay his head on the glass and watched the streets zip by. One of the closed-down takeaways took his interest, remembering it was his previous place of employment before the owner had gotten into an argument with the female lead of a local theatre group. She felt the takeaway's name was a personal attack on her and even breached copyrights. Despite the early hours, and signing away his option of ever telling anyone anything at all about what happens to the building he cleans, under pain of dismissal or worse, Simon much prefers his new job compared to working at the La Prima Donna kebab house. His new bosses pay him enough to keep his mouth closed, even if he has no clue exactly what goes on in all those computer labs. The bus pulled into a business park, a complex of low-profile buildings, home to a dozen different outlets that offer all sorts of services: plumbing, car rentals, cash and carries, each held behind brown bricks and cheaply made plastic directions. Simon's place of work was the only one of the collection that wasn't made publicly obvious. Yet it stood out with flaking white paint and a series of thick metal bars attached to the blacked-out windows. Simon stepped off the bus and made his way down a crumbling concrete path, stepping over the cracks, and headed to the only door of the white building. He pressed one of his keycards against a grey slab attached to the wall, and with a buzz, the glass and metal swung open. This process continued with 3 more sets of doors, and the early morning light was quickly replaced with unnaturally bright, fluorescent hums. He was part of only a small handful of staff that entered the building this early, and it was novel to Simon to be in there while it was this quiet. He still had a sense of excitement, feeling like a spy working through security checks. This sense was broken when he passed the main desk, at which a security guard was sitting.
"All right, Simon. Good morning. How's it going?" said the guard, beaming a smile at Simon, who was fixed on heading to the supply cupboard further into the building. Simon was stunned for a moment. Since starting the job, the guard had only given him a quick head nod acknowledgement of a morning. Simon stopped and turned towards the desk. I'm okay, thank you, Hashim. Just, about to start cleaning and stuff." Simon trailed off. Sound.
Hashim said, his eyes breaking contact with Simon and looking at the monitors in front of him, almost seemingly ignoring Simon's response.
"Here, Simon."
Hashim nervously scratched his nose.
"You know about computers and stuff, don't you?"
Simon did, in fact, have a degree in computer science from over 10 years ago. When applying for the job as a janitor, he had hoped that his employing benefactors would have overlooked his extensive cleaning experience and taken notice of it on his CV, fast-tracking a promotion for him into something more computery. Yeah, I know a few bits and pieces. Why, what's up?"
"Well, I was faffing around with the camera feed settings during the night shift and I lost connection with the cameras. Can you fix them before the IT guys turn up? I'll be up Poop Creek, no paddle, otherwise, and I can't leave the desk, so..."
Simon let out a soft sigh. Yeah, okay, I'll take a look, but it'll have to be quick." Simon went round the desk and stooped down. He peered at the screens as Hashim looked on expectantly. Simon knew at a glance that the issue would mean going to the surveillance server and resetting it. Another soft sigh left Simon as he raised up.
"Where are you going? Can you fix it?"
a fidgety Hashim asked. Yeah, I can, I think. Just gotta go to the server room. Back in a moment."
Sound.
Hashim drifted off again, back to the monitors. Simon went through one more set of doors into a long white hallway. He continued down, spinning a keycard in his hands, with a bit of excitement again.
Whilst he'd never been asked to clean the server room, he did have access to it, in case of emergency, apparently. Access he'd yet to use. He pressed the card against the scanner, and the server room door clicked open. Inside was everything Simon imagined it would be and more. A colossal library of tall black boxes and glass houses, thousands upon thousands of blinking lights, switches, multicoloured wires, and even a huge internal dish antenna connected to the only computer monitor within the room. The air was cool and crisp as the AC units worked overtime to ensure the servers never got too hot. This kind of cold room thrilled Simon. He walked along the array of technology and was in awe of the complexity that this building was hiding away. It finally struck him, though. Nothing had labels or even post-it notes saying which server was which. He walked back to the computer, he saw. Perhaps there was a database or map on there he could reference, he thought. Sitting down in front of the monitor, he wiggled the mouse and the screen flared into life. As the screen warmed up, he took a moment to look at the huge dish antenna to his side. Is it broadcasting? Receiving? Why is it inside? Questions crossed his mind. He snapped back to the job at hand. He began clicking through folders and files, all of them alluding to test signals, hidden wave patterns in the atmosphere. Bursts of silent experimental sound into the unknown, but nothing that told him the location of the surveillance server. He felt like he was getting nowhere, until he spotted a file labelled Secret Server Control. If I was running a server room, I'd want all this stuff to be secret too, thought Simon, as he clicked on the folder. A single window popped up with two options. Establish internal video connection, establish internal audio connection. Aha! This must be the control system for the CCTV network, he thought. Both were set to off. He thought it would be best to try and get the audio working first. He shifted the mouse pointer and hit on. While Simon sat waiting for confirmation, he felt something zip across his brain. Ah! Ow! Wait, who said that? Confirmation? Simon sprang up, spinning around to try and find the location of the voice he heard. Hey, is that you, Hashim? Are you playing a joke on me? Simon paced around the server room, but no matter where he went, the voice followed him. Quit it, Hashim! Quit describing what I'm doing! It ain't funny! Simon continued to search the server room, but there were no speakers, no cameras, no one else in the room other than himself. He clasped his hands to his head. You're in my head? Simon realised. Just then, Simon's phone rang.
All right, Simon, it's Hashim. Are you close to fixing the cameras? It's getting on a bit, you know, and...
Yeah, totally am. Yeah, just walking up to the server now. Yep, definitely know where it is, Simon said, trying to keep calm. In that moment, Simon knew where the server was located. His legs seemed to carry him. He arrived at one of the blank servers that certainly did control the camera feeds.
Sound, said Hashim. And you know how to fix it?
Yeah, I think I do. Simon began flicking switches and jiggling cables on the server.
Ace, man, the camera feeds are back on now. Don't know what you've done, but I'm glad you did it. Cheers, I owe you a pint.
Hashim hastily hung up. Simon was left alone in the server room once more. Who are you? The voice did not reply. But you just did! Damn it, this is getting too crazy. I need to get out of here, get some fresh air. Simon briskly made his way out of the server room and began striding down the hallway back to the desk. I can still hear you, still whittling away, describing what I'm doing, Simon said out loud. Oh, for fuck...
All right, Simon,
said Hashim as Simon stormed past, ignoring anything he had to say. Simon burst through the front door of the building and gulped down fresh air. Oh, just need to stay calm, just calm, think straight, work out what's going on. Simon controlled his breathing and began feeling more calm. With one more deep inhale, he tried working out what was going on. Hey, voice, you're describing what I'm doing and kind of making it happen? The voice did not respond. Oh, fine, okay. But let's test this out. Simon racked his brain for something to say. I'm going to the library, and I'm going to read Hamlet. He'd never thought about doing such a thing in his life, but Simon set off from the white building and jumped onto the next bus into town. The library was only a few minutes away from the bus stop. He went in, found a nice quiet corner with no distraction, and read Hamlet in its entirety. When he closed the book, Simon felt his body rock as if he was on a roller coaster that had come to a sudden stop. He gasped. To his sense of time, it was like all his actions were on fast forward and sections cut out. But to his memory, the story was there. He had certainly read Hamlet from start to end. Unperturbed, Simon had an idea and tested again. I'm going to the corner shop, and I'm going to buy a winning scratch card. Simon left the library, went down the street and into a small corner shop. He shot right to the counter and bought the first scratch card he saw. He stepped back onto the street and began scratching away. He had to double check as his mind rushed with excitement. But sure enough, he was holding on to a jackpot winning card. £2.5 million was now his. Jeez, okay. Simon's mind began to race with more possibilities. You're damn right it did, wherever you are. But let's kick this up a notch. This plan I'm thinking of right now. I'm going to go out and do it. Ignoring his phone ringing off the hook as his workplace were trying to question him about how the bins weren't emptied yet, Simon took his lottery winnings and began stock trading, seemingly knowing exactly what to buy and sell. His cash winnings went up 100-fold. He bought a private island, had a mansion built on it to his exact standards, met the love of his life, and in what felt like a composed whirlwind, he was then lounging on his own beach, his wife lovingly snuggled into his chest as he sipped on his fourth cocktail of the day. It all seemed to happen in a moment. Simon looked around his beach, at his wife, and the sun blazing away in the clear blue sky. This is exactly what I wanted. And with that, Simon was content, and his every whim fulfilled. The end. Wait, what do you mean, the end? Simon sprung out of the sand. His wife tumbled away from his side. He began pacing down to the water's edge. His wife called to him, asking if he was feeling all right. He clasped his hands to his head. His mind raced for answers, thinking back to the server room, the information that was on the screen. Simon fell to his knees. The end? Is this just a story? Is this really the end? What's going to happen now? Am I even... Simon stared into the horizon. He realized what was happening. I don't think I want to hear your any more voice. And with that, Simon couldn't hear the voice anymore. He stayed kneeling in the sand, watching as the sun dropped below the horizon, and his world slowly faded into darkness.
Wow.
Well, shit.
That was stunning, man. I really, really liked that. The humdrum beginnings that were so relatable, like, 30-something staring into the mirror in the morning. I think we can all say that we've been there. Although not actually me yet.
No.
I'm a little bit younger than you guys.
It's a wee baby.
That's right. But I have stared gauntly into the mirror, searching my face for reasons why I'm going to work. But that was, it reminded me initially quite strongly of the film Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell and I forget who the other actor is, but where he's being narrated and he has to go and find the author who's currently writing the book
Yes.
of his life. But also it had a delicious X-Files-y tang to it, about how he sort of managed to hack the universe and made it work for him, and those big jumps in time where he was just achieving things that he just said he was going to try and achieve were just...
It says a lot that you and I had the same reaction to. He sat down and he read Hamlet without being distracted, and we both went, oh, that would be so good.
Yeah,
Just
I mean...
the ability to concentrate for that amount of time without something getting in the way.
Something getting in the way, just being able to just focus on something. There was a lot of stuff that felt almost too real for me. Like I said, the bit about the humdrum start.
Yeah.
But, trying to just sort of check boxes in life with whatever powers you have felt really quite, very real for me.
there was a fantastic moment towards the end, actually, where you said, more thoughts rushed through Stephen's head. Yeah, damn right they did. Where he would, like, the line between the narrative of the story and his internal narrative became blurred, and it was absolutely brilliant, which then led into the end stuff. And really, really cool. Really cool.
Excellent.
We've also all had voices in our stories that worked quite well. Like you had the Gumdrop King, the wicked Prime Minister, and then was it Yeshim, the security guard?
Hashim. Yeah.
Hashim. That was great.
He was great.
He was great.
I loved him. We'll have to do, anyone who's on Patreon, we'll definitely do a special podcast, and we'll do it presented by the Gumdrop King, the Prime Minister, and Hashim. I think that has to happen. So, anyone who doesn't know, which is anyone who's not currently recording this podcast, Ian is a musician who made the lovely jingle that we use for this show. So our little fanfare that goes in between was produced by the amazing Ian here. What are you doing musically at the moment, Ian?
I wrote the jingle for your podcast. And when it comes to me making music, the sort of catalyst for all this was I love making stuff, and have always had this high and fancy dream of making a video game from start to finish. And
well, we now know that you can write stories and you can write music, so it's just programming now, right?
That was the thing. I spent a few years learning how to program, and music making was always considered as this sort of last piece at the stuff I was making, because I had a tendency to always fall back on using music from other video games or copyrighted stuff, and to the point where like you upload something to YouTube and the whole thing's muted. And I was the music in a game, especially what I was working on, it's always been the backbone. That's what I was making. So I eventually said, well, sod it. I'm just going to download the first free piece of music making stuff. So long as it looks like Dance EJ, I'll be all right. And happened to stumble across program LMMS, and had a digital keyboard that had been sitting gathering dust from many Christmases ago, and I was saying, I'll definitely learn how to play it. Plugged it in, and before I knew it, like, this is the thing that's really, really stuck. It's been a wonderful process. But
your stuff is super cool, man.
Oh, thank you.
It's for those of you listening, we'll pop later on. We'll give you a chance to say where people can hear it. But Ian writes this really cool kind of like late 90s video game sound. Early 90s to late 90s. So that kind of 32 through 128-bit era sound. But you're so good at capturing atmosphere and tone. It's super cool.
It somehow feels nostalgic whilst being really fresh.
Yeah.
We both really like the jingle for this as well, so thank you very much.
Not saying that we like Ian's music, but I am in a band and I asked someone else to do music for the show. That's how much we like Ian's music. So I'm going to ask you a question now, Ian. You've spoken about music, but now we're going to move on to the meat and two veg of this podcast. What are you reading at the moment?
I have been absolutely dreading this question. Because
go on.
I in all honesty, I'm not a huge reader. The books that I've got on my bookshelf, they're all like arts books of shows that I like, but the most I've got collected book wise are old fighting fantasy books, and I very rarely pick them up and read them.
It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be reading a novel. Like, is there a magazine you're into? A blog that's really catching you? Like, what sheet music are you reading? What's filling your time?
Again, in all honesty, the thing that's filling most of my time has been playing video games. Not to put a timestamp on this thing, but with all the things that have been going on in the world, there's been an awful lot of time to be able to sit down and work on a backlog of old games and experience whatever story I can find there. And I think I've always found the ability to directly influence the story that you're experiencing too alluring compared to sitting down and reading a book, unfortunately.
That's not unfortunate. That's fascinating, I think. And not to get too poncy about video games or whatever, or too far down the video games as art thing. But theoretically, just working through a backlog of games that you want to experience, that's a perfectly adequate answer, I think, to what are you reading right now. Because I recently played The Last of Us 2, and that hit me just as hard as reading a big novel. It's experiencing a story, and you
waited almost as long for that as you do for each Game of Thrones book. So
why did you do that to me?
Because I like hurting you.
I'm fairly sure it's now been about 10 years since the last one.
Oh dear.
Right, yeah. So possibly we got the answer to this next question in your first one, but the next question is, what's the best book you've ever read?
What sort of flitters through my mind is like casting memories back to being in secondary school, and we read Frankenstein and a whole load of Shakespeare. Like, thoroughly enjoy Shakespeare. I think that's why I mentioned Hamlet in the story.
Oh, really?
The idea of someone writing such plays hundreds of years ago and it's still being like brilliant stories today really got to me as a kid. But out of the fighting fantasy novels that I've got, I think my favourite has to be Forest of Doom.
Forest of Doom. What happens in Forest of Doom?
Can I guess? Is there a really dangerous forest?
Well, I think it's
oh my god, there isn't. Tell us what happens.
It's strangely enough, it was reading the introduction to the book, the sort of little prelude into it, that really got my juices going as my imagination as a kid. Just it starts off with you describing you're just a blank sword for hire, and you are hired to find two pieces of a hammer, and the two pieces are supposedly located within the Forest of Doom, and the idea of a blank slate character and just being able to imbue your characteristics onto it and within your head, that's. I was having
because this is a choose your own adventure book,
yeah.
Right? So I guess that is the perfect setup for it, isn't it?
Very much so. It's they were very much the seeds being planted for the future role playing that like very much gotten into over the past couple of years.
You can say we. They know we're losing.
Oh, nice. I've actually, I don't think I've ever read a choose your own adventure, but I feel like I should probably.
You should. You absolutely should. And Ian, I'm going to ask you a question off the back of it. Do you still, now as an adult, if you were to pick one up, would you, when given a decision, keep a finger in that page in case you've made the wrong choice?
Well, something that I recently discovered was they have created a modern, up-to-date app version of Forest of Doom, and you can activate an anti-cheat option which prevents you from going back. So in this modern day age, you can play it, and I must admit, yes, I do have a tendency to hold my finger on the page and have a sneaky little peek. Well, actually, to be honest, at this point, I know the vast majority of the outcomes of the situations that you find, but
that's fascinating though that they've classified it as cheat mode.
Yeah.
To do that, because obviously, because it's a game, right? Like, it's not just a choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
It's a game, and being able to save your game isn't classified as cheating in most
No,
games.
not at all. It's a respawn.
Yeah, it's a respawn, or like, so this is basically the original Iron mode.
Yes, yeah. Hardcore mode.
Hardcore mode. Paperback.
The weirdly, this interesting timing. I was sent yesterday by a friend. Someone's made a program online. They were doing it on Twitch, but they built this program where you can make your own choose your adventure stories and then send them out to people. And I think it may be a fun thing. We should collab on one, Ian, and we'll tweet it out when this episode goes out. We'll tweet where you can actually make them, and I think we should get one made and put it out.
I'd absolutely love to do that. That
does sound fun.
And it may become the answer to this. What's the worst book you've ever read, Ian?
What comes to mind at first is a programming book I read a couple of years ago, where
non-fiction.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Why
was this one particularly heinous?
For the first half of the book was very interesting and explained the sort of fundamentals of programming, and then it started to talk about imbuing, like, how do I put it?
Put it really simply, because I am definitely too stupid to know what you're going to say.
It talked about spawning things into a world and giving it statistics, and okay, make this thing and it's going to jump this high, it has this much health, and
you can't do that to a baby, man. You got to let it grow and make its own choices. You can't tell it how high it's going to jump. That's unfair.
Well, if we just sort of used babies that as a placeholder, that would have made sense and understandable. But he started using characters from My Little Pony as placeholders for all the things, and it just for some reason just threw me for a loop, and it immediately painted a picture of the author in my head as he's sitting there, Cheeto dust on his fingers, fedora, surrounded in My Little Pony figurines. I'm just I don't like to.
You're not shitting on bronies.
Yeah, to be what's the word? Any prejudice.
You don't want to kink shame.
But
if a man wants to clop, he can do it in his own stable on his own time.
I'd read other books and they'd use anything as placeholders, but not that. It imbued too much character into the placeholder, what should just be basic information. I don't know.
You don't want to have to work at practicing death of the author when you're reading a non-fiction book about coding, is that right?
Oh dear.
Very nice. So perhaps we could expand this one, because the question here is, what's your favourite literary character? But I feel like we could fairly safely expand this to just generally, what's your favourite character from fiction?
I always, when I was a kid, always looked up to the lone gunman, the John McClanes, the Solid Snakes.
You can't pluralise Solid Snake. No.
Well, the Snakes.
The Lone Rangers.
It's interesting that you go for those two as well, because in many ways they're quite different in a way, aren't they? Sort of like Solid Snake is this sort of genetically perfect, enhanced soldier, bred for war and all this kind of epic Hideo Kojima stuff. And then John McClane he's sort of supposed to be the everyman, isn't he? Like in a Hollywood that was filled with like muscle-bound Sly Stallones and Arnies.
A slightly puffy, thinning Bruce Willis.
Yeah. He has like a vest on for most of the first one. He's not, he's not necessarily the all-action hero people were used to in the 80s. But of course he is.
So for any Americans listening, so what we would call a waistcoat, Americans would call a vest. And I think that would really alter that movie if he'd been wearing a waistcoat the entire time. But No shoes, waistcoat. Beautiful. But yeah, I don't even know what the right term is. Wife beater, isn't it? Wife saver. John McClane.
John McClane, yeah, wife saver. He's taking it back.
Reclaiming the name.
However,
So, go on.
thank you. However, I have just remembered that your podcast is based on the idea of stories and books. So,
we forgot too. Don't worry.
Love it.
Arthur Dent from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, nice choice.
Oh, solid choice.
That's something that I think is a very common theme throughout all the stories I thoroughly enjoy is an ordinary person being thrown into the middle of something that's completely unexplainable at first glance.
Yeah,
Oh man,
you actually really.
Dent is the best of it.
Oh yeah, he's so good. And actually, I felt like that actually really came across in your story. I would say, this guy, the janitor or whatever, like being thrust into a situation that he's been led to by his ignorance was fantastic.
It's like it's funny that you should say that. That was that concept was very much something that I wanted to have in the story, but something I desperately wanted to avoid at first is the concept of a man sitting down in front of a computer and finding a secret file. But ended up using it.
But in such a, I'm going to break the fourth wall a little bit, but I work in IT, and that moment of, if I had a server, I'd want the files to be secret. That is absolutely the best thing I've heard today. So this one I think is actually going to be really interesting with you, Ian. So normally we ask if you could turn a book into any other medium, what would it be? Like, what book would you pick, and what medium would you go to?
Ooh.
And I think you're probably going to be a good spicy answer for that. Are you going to turn your coding book into an episode of My Little Pony?
Oh, gee, Pinkie Pie, the code's here.
Oh no.
It's the Great Demon C++.
Oh no, I dread to see.
How have we managed? Last episode we alienated trendy people, and now we're getting rid of fandoms. It's just going to be us.
I can only assume it's some desperate plea, like subconscious plea from us to some sort of misanthropic altar.
Go on, Ian. I'm going to demand an answer.
Right. I searched through my head and thought, well, what's my favourite film? And one of my absolute favourite films of all time is Seven Samurai. And there are certainly games that come to mind that certainly have also taken heavy inspiration from it, but even if it was a text-based adventure of Seven Samurai where you're having to employ samurai to help defend a village and working out what they like, working out how to talk to them, get on their good side, and your ultimate end coming from how you build up the relationship with who you meet and potentially defend you.
Ooh.
Did you just create a Seven Samurai dating sim with tower defense elements?
I was just thinking that. or some kind of like strategy game that relies on interpersonal connections with Ronin.
I'm not defending you. You didn't buy me cake.
Definitely, I would play this game, man. You should definitely make this.
The truth of it is, you wouldn't play it. We would all play it together on Discord, drunk at 3:00 in the morning.
Yes, this would happen.
One Saturday. This is a frequent occurrence. This is a reason to become a patron and join the Discord, because we are absolute garbage fire disasters, and you might get involved in this kind of thing. Ian too. Ian's there. Ian's a nightmare.
He makes the hard choices.
Ian is the hard choice.
So I think this next question is actually the hardest one.
I would agree.
Which, it's just it's quite obviously books can be very emotional, and they should be. They should tap into all that's going on inside your head, and I've had experiences in the past where like I've been reading something and it brought up fairly painful memories immediately and shoved them to the front of my brain. But in a fun way, obviously. But when did you last cry whilst reading?
Oh. Again, it's going to be still technically reading, but it was a game. And it wasn't that long ago. It was a game that one of our friends put me onto. And the game was The Unavowed. And there is a particular point in it where I'm going to try my absolute best to avoid spoilers, but a cat...
I know nothing about this game, so even you saying the title is a spoiler.
It was a bit where a character meets a long-lost family member, but he had to stay in the shadows and not necessarily reveal all of his secrets. And the way those two interacted, and the voice acting that was on display, it really struck a chord with me. It's excellent story, excellent characters, and
I've got to ask, because it's happened to me, and this is I feel like a good time to have this conversation. As I've got older, I'm finding that movies and fucking adverts, like anything, all media, just affects me quicker. Like I will have an emotional response much faster and a lot stronger to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's, I've grown up enough now to not be a stubborn prick about my own emotions. But do you guys find this, or is this just me? Is this just part of my long-term breakdown?
I think I'd agree. I think I'd definitely feel things in a more raw sense as I get older. I don't know whether that's just fear of death creeping in though.
Fuck. Ah, yes, the ticking clock of doom.
No. In all seriousness, yeah, I have basically any movie or, as you say, advert or anything like that plays on like a sad paternal dynamic. So somebody having issues with their like losing a father or stuff like that. But it immediately gets me. And like, I mean, so we were talking about you mentioned that you'd cried when you played a video game, Ian.
Mm-hmm.
I wept like a child through The Last of Us 2, because it was just so like powerful. The story between a father character and his daughter it completely seized me and really was just yanking on my emotion strings in a way that I never really, as a child and stuff. I don't remember playing video games and crying. That's They
took the Chaos Emeralds, Mum!
Yeah, exactly.
They took the Chaos Emeralds!
But I love it, anything to feel something, Nick.
Ah, yes, a barrier between me and the void.
It's weird that, like, you say that maybe it's approaching fear of death, but if there's an advert or a film or a game, anything where it's just there going fear of death, I go, well, I don't care. But if it's an advert where a baby drops his favorite teddy bear and the family walks off and leave it behind, I'm bawling like a kid. It's like,
oh, absolutely.
And it's like an advert for a like washing up powder.
Drops the bear, leaves it behind. Not all stains can be washed out. Some of them are on the soul. For everything else, there's Daz. Right, I'm going to ask you. It's our final proper question. Well, we ask a lot of other weird stuff in between, I know, but it's still, I think for a long time, it's going to be my favourite question ever. Can you tell me one really disinteresting fact about you, Ian?
Oh, so many. Oh.
That is already a great response. So many.
One I tell relatively often. I got poked in the eye by the front man of the band Pendulum.
I mean,
so it was disinteresting
okay.
facts about yourself.
Okay,
that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
There's so many questions I want to ask. Like, what was he on stage, or were you just like you backstage? You're like, oh, it's so good. Boop. Oh shit. Like, you can't lead with that, man. An interaction with a celebrity is by its very nature interesting. I'm calling for a recount. I want another one.
It was a dingy pub in Carlisle, in a basement where there was no real stage, so to speak. It was the floor, and everyone crowded round the setup. Just so happened to be at the front, and the front man was properly getting into it. You know, like mic in one hand, other hand up in the air pointing, and going along with the beat. Just happened to get too close, and he jammed me in the eye on beat, and stopped in the middle of the song and said, "Oh, are you all right there, mate?" I was just clutching onto it, going, "Yeah, I'm fine. Keep going.
Keep playing, Pendulum."
I've got to. What was the venue?
Brickyard. Yeah, it was the Brickyard. You played there, didn't you? Did you play in Brickyard? Yeah,
I was about to say, I think I played there. It is weird. The stage is lower than the rest of the room.
How strange.
It drops down, and there are like black and yellow hazard stripes around it and stuff. It's real trippy. We played, and we were supporting a guy called Chris Barris, who's a really cool blues singer. And we played this show, and we'd done a few nights with him before. We'd just come from Newcastle and driven across in the day to Carlisle. And while we're there, we get in, and the crowd is like, it's not great. The night before we'd had like 300 people, and then this night there's like 60. We're like, oh, this is the last date we're doing with him. This doesn't feel good. What a way to go out. And we went out the front, and the owner grabbed me and said, I can't believe how good this turnout is. What a night. Oh, maybe perspective is important in these moments. But yeah, that makes it even more interesting. It's a stage I've played on.
And it's also a stage that's dropped. I don't even like. I can imagine it, obviously, but is it designed just to put musicians in their place somehow? Like, be like you know, the owners really wanting to ensure that the band is lower than the audience.
I'll be honest, there are a lot of venues up and down this country. Well, they're a lot less than they used to be because they're disappearing by the day. But a lot of places that the stage seems to have been an afterthought. Yeah. Like one of the first gigs we ever played, and I'm calling this place out. It's in central London. It's called St Moritz, and you go down into this dungeon. So I'm going to call it a dungeon. And the stage, we're a 5-piece band. I had to stand on the floor in front of the stage. But that didn't matter, particularly because the stage was elevated by about 6 inches. So it was just this weird little cubby hole, slightly above floor level, and I stood in front of it.
In a dungeon.
So weird. It's the first gig we ever booked, second gig we ever played. Never looked back.
It does very much sound like one of those places where they think about building it, they'll dig the foundation and then give up. Again, I'll slap some wooden planks over it, it'll be fine.
I feel like this is almost the seed for another story, you know? It's the stages of the UK. Oh.
I mean, pre-depression, Brexit, post-depression, right? The stages of the UK.
Yeah, there you go.
This has been a hell of an adventure, Ian.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me along.
You've been a lovely guest.
Yes, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your story, and it was cool to get a different perspective on the questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'd said, you know, we have that conversation. Not everyone that we want to talk to, not everyone we want to write with, is going to be, a good writer or a comfortable orator or a big reader. And to me, that's more interesting. I don't want everyone we speak to be really, really booky, because otherwise, in the end, it's just going to be people who like books talking about books. And I think there's so much more to discover about narrative as a concept.
Very much so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And just having people take a crack at it is excellent to watch.
Hell yeah. Especially when they knock it out of the park,
Oh,
like you
thank
did.
you.
Yes.
So, Ian, where can people hear your music?
If you go onto YouTube, where it is at the moment, and search Ian Howard Music, you may just stumble across me. My current avatar is just me sitting in a chair looking at my phone. It's
That doesn't help if they don't know what you look like, Ian.
go on the internet and look for the guy sitting in a chair.
You can find a man with blonde hair but a ginger beard. You're on to a winner.
Hopefully, in the very near future, on your website there will be a link to something more substantial than just my YouTube page. Maybe a Spotify, maybe a SoundCloud. Who knows?
We'll definitely tweet out whatever Ian's
Excellent.
got. So if you look back to Twitter, you'll be able to find something. Talking about this lovely, lovely man. While I'm talking about that sort of thing, anyone listening, if you are on iTunes or can get onto iTunes/Apple Podcasts, any reviews left of the show, it doesn't have to be a nice review. You don't have to tell us we're wonderful. You can give us real, genuine feedback. But every single one really helps, and it helps to grow the podcast. It's really important at this early stage, and we would really appreciate anyone who does it. Speaking of people we appreciate, as my last thing, I have a list of the pub patrons who've been kind to us this time. We've only paid for one round to date, so we've had 3 rounds bought for us. The first was bought for us by Mr. Matthew McLaren, who got you a large and me a small. Not taking it personally. The second round was bought by Gary Laird, who this time was insisting he would get shots. Apparently, 10 of them were tequila and 2 of them were water. I don't believe him. No water in there at all. And our final thank you goes to Mr. Scott Byrne, who today got me a cup of tea and an apology for the headache he gave me last time.
My, what an adventure. You'll have to come back another time. Our adventurers are off now in search of more stories. If you'd like to meet our adventuring party, you can reach them by Raven at Bookcase Tiny. Or, alternatively, you can help them on Patreon to fund their adventures. Those tavern ales don't pay for themselves, I'm afraid. But thank you for joining us. Now get out of my wizard tower. I have wizardy things to do. Bloody do-good as always, coming round here wanting something. I'm gonna get myself some biscuits.